My good friends are world advancers. We go chasing after answers. No more each day.
All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of My Good Friends. I feel like we've done this a few times because we have. We've been having a few technical issues this week, but that's not going to deter us. We are going to move forward. I am in my closet, and as usual, per usual, it's the best in the house. And my co-host Tina is with me, of course.
Hello, hello.
And two of my very good friends, Tiffany and Peter, are with us as well. And we're going to have a good time today talking about trust, of all things, trust. So, Tiffany, why don't you introduce yourself, and I'll let Peter do the same.
Hey, everyone. Tiffany Kruzcek. I have a consulting background. That's how I met Ben. And all four of us actually started a business together. But now I am an EOS Implementer. Entrepreneurial Operating System is what that stands for. And I work with business owners and their leadership teams to really help them identify exactly what they want out of their business and to help them achieve it, basically. Thanks, Ben.
It's hard for me not to make fun of the name every time, but I'm going to keep going because I know you'll get in trouble.
Or to ask you, was that technology? The operating system?
They have to figure out a different way, but that's beside the point. All right, Peter, you're up.
Hey, great to be here. Ben and I have known each other for about 13 years. So I've graduated from good friend to very good friend to best friend. Maybe I've gone back a few notches. It depends. It really depends.
No, it depends. It depends. But, we're not working together as closely, so.
That's true. So also with a consulting background, I've been in revenue cycle management consulting for about 13 years. The last almost 8 of which have been in the company that I co-founded along with Ben and Tiffany and Tina. HealthRise, we're almost 8 years old now. My time there is split between operational work, account management work, and business and service development. I think with a smaller company, we're about 60 employees. You wear a lot of hats, as I tend to do. So right now, I'm spending a lot of time in Southeast Michigan. I'm working with a large client leading their enterprise data analytics team in an interim capacity, while still having my HealthRise hat, pretty active. So glad to be here.
Right. Peter, you were a child when I met you. There's a picture that a friend of ours put up, and it was like Peter when he was right out of college. And I mean, it's like, are you 15 there? Like what?
Might have been. I've been growing this for 13 years now. So that's took me 13 years to get this beard.
It looks real good. It's real good. All right. So we're going to talk about trust. I was subscribed to HBR. It doesn't make me smarter. I like to think it makes me smarter, but I generally do like the articles that come out. And there was one in particular that came out in this episode around trust. I think the exact term is begins with trust, and it was about leadership. And I thought it was phenomenal. I often get through HBR books and I'm like, oh, there's some pretty good ones in here, but I don't read the whole thing. I read the whole thing and I thought this is really good, and it's got some really good nuggets in there. So I forwarded it to Tiffany and Peter and Tina, and I was like, hey, this would be cool. We could do a podcast around this. And so if you're wondering what it is, we'll put the link in there on the LinkedIn post. But I want to just read a kind of quote from the article, because I felt like there was a really good point about leadership, and in fact, I think I can put it on my screen for those of you who are
That's risky.
For those of you who are like watching this on YouTube, there it goes.
Break it.
Look at that screen share. Boom. And it says, okay, wait. I think there we go. It says that traditional leadership narrative is all about you. So this is kind of the classic leadership narrative, right? Your vision and strategy, your ability to make the tough calls and rally the troops, your talents, your charisma, your heroic moments of courage and instinct. And they go on to say, but leadership really isn't about you. And the next thing they said was, this is our job as a leader is to create the conditions for where people to fully realize their own capacity and power. And that's true not only when you're in the trenches with them, but also when you're not around. And they said this is the cleanest test, when you've permanently moved on from the team, do they continue to kind of thrive and keep going? And so the whole article is kind of around trust. And or actually could share the triangle, which I think maybe could wise. Let me hold on. I put the triangle here because I thought it was great. It's not the tree of trust. That's a different thing. But this was the triangle of trust, and that had three main parts: authenticity, do I experience the real you, empathy, I believe you care about me and my success, and then logic, I know you can do it, your reasoning and judgment are sound. And so those three things kind of make up whether or not someone trusts you, or if you can build trust as a capital. And so I thought it'd be cool if we kind of went through that with each other and kind of I don't know, figured out where in the book, in the magazine, they called it Wobble, like which one. Everyone has one of those they aren't strong in, and so which one is that? Which one is the one that kind of like you probably don't have as much in, and so that was the one you should be working on. So we're trying to experiment here. So I'll go first. I'll be the guinea pig, but someone has to kind of be the facilitator. So I don't know, Tiffany, that's you.
Okay.
And I think maybe Tiffany, you want to try to do me, maybe like you could like.
Sure. So I have no idea what I'm doing, but Ben,
we're professionals. Don't say that. We're professionals.
Is there a time that you can remember when maybe you potentially had a trust issue with someone, whether it was a colleague, maybe a potential client, but something that happened, maybe a personal issue between the two of you? It could have been you didn't get a client you were hoping to.
So I have a very clear, this one actually stuck with me for a long time. I actually had to have Chris Ramey help me kind of unpack this one, because I think it was so blindsiding that it was like shook me, you know, and up until Chris kind of helped me realize that person still had power over me, which was interesting by itself, because I still kept going back to it, you know, even though that person's retired, and I won't mention the person's name. But it was my boss at a company the three of us worked for, not the last one, the one before. And I was a leader, you know, at a big site, and I had a lot of people under me, and it was a big job. And he pulled me into his office one day, and it was just like we were just doing our normal, and I guess we're doing our normal update, like a weekly update, right? We're doing a normal update, and at the end, he's like, "Well, you know, it's all about you," like saying it in jest. Like at the end of some comment, and I was like, "Excuse me, what do you mean by that?" And he's like, "Well, you know, it's all about Ben. Whatever Ben needs, Ben wants to get. Like it's all about whatever you want." And I was like, "I don't think that's true at all. What are you talking about?" And so he was like, "Well, he started like, I mean, he was backpedaling a little bit, but he was started to go into this. Well, it's, you know, you did this, you've done this action, and." Which I thought a number of those things were taken out of context, but so in the article they said to make this person
assume they are right.
They're right? The skeptic, right? To make them the skeptic, and they're right. So I was like, well, so yeah, I felt like he thought that I was putting my own interests above everybody else's, and I would say that I have a saying with people that have always worked for me, and I tell everybody, I always have your best interest in mind. So I may do things that you may not think it was like the right thing to do, but I'm always thinking like, how do I make that person? I mean, my number one strength is maximizer. So this for me was like, and not maximizer myself, like maximizer of other people. And so I always felt like this was just a shot against me, right? So anyways, that was one that came to mind when I read the article, like right away, before I even had thought about doing this as an assessment of myself.
So that's then an empathy wobble?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I'm pretty well known not to have a lot of empathy, so this isn't like an abnormal thing, but the context of this is a little different. The way they use empathy is different than I was. That I wouldn't think that that's the way I think. I don't try to put my interest above other people's.
But it can be perceived that way.
Correct. Right.
Is the point.
Yeah.
What I thought was interesting was that your wobbles can be different with different groups of people. So maybe clients versus family, or colleagues versus friends. So what do you think about that? Do you think that your empathy wobble transcends the group, or do you think it's different with different groups?
I mean, I definitely probably have more patience for people that work for me versus like leadership. If I look back at my career, I've definitely had times I definitely have had times where I think that I'm better than they are, where I hold them in contempt.
Wait, leadership or people that work for you?
Upward versus downward, right?
Correct. Yeah. So to steal a phrase from Searching for Bobby Fischer, which was one of my favorite movies. If you've never seen it, it's about this little kid who's plays chess, and he's going to be the next. Bobby Fischer was like one of the most famous chess people growing up, and then he just disappeared like out of nowhere. Right? I don't know if you guys know the story, but it's great. There's a scene in it where this like his kid was like, "You need to hold them in contempt. You're better than they are," and he's like, "I don't want to." And so, but I think I read onto the article that there's a part in there where it goes through empathy, and one of the things in there is like, you may find yourself in a meeting and you're like totally, like you don't understand why people aren't getting it, and why are we even talking about this, because you already get it. And I'm like, oh, that's me 100%. And so you may actually look like you are totally disinterested because you are. And the perception is that you're better than they are because you already know it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's 100% what I do, what I've done in my past for sure. Because
I would guess the poker face is hard to keep then as well, right? So like if that's the way you're mentally processing it, you're feeling like this is a waste of my time and probably everyone else's time. But if there's one person in that room or two people in the meeting who need that time, who need the relative value to them in going through it in exhausting detail in your mind is high enough where it's worth going through it. I think that's where they were talking about the empathy as a leader, to be able to recognize that and overcome and step into that with them, as opposed to, like you said, like saying, hey, come on, like get up to speed, move along. I also find that challenging. So it's navigating that, and then also ensuring that, your poker face isn't going to be very good. They're going to pick it up eventually, if not in that meeting, then in the next one. Right. And so how do you overcome that then? Right? Is it a change in mindset and belief so that you don't need to fake it? You actually believe that the time you're spending is valuable? How do you actually counteract that then?
Well, I really appreciated the author kind of going into one step you could do is be thinking like, how do I help this person? I mean, I have a natural natural thing for me is maximizes what I'm thinking. So if I was engaged in the meeting, even though I know that I'm thinking 3 steps ahead of them and I already have it, for me to engage with them and be like, how can I help in that situation, or help other people get it, or take time with someone, or even just be not on my phone. I've definitely been more intentional about that for sure. There's no 100% better on those things. But I think that's where I probably need to just be intentional about how can I help maximize someone. Even if I think that they don't get it and they're not going to get it, or it's going to take them a lot longer to get to it. And that's the hard part too, is like, I'm a pretty good communicator. So like when I see someone struggling with communication and they're like running something, I'm like, oh my, like I'm immediately going, oh my God, we're going to do this. Are we? So then I have that tendency, either I like need to step in and run it, or I need to like just check out. That's what I've been. That's been my 2 options, I think, in the past.
Yep.
That's what I would say. I don't know. I had some other examples, but I think that one's a pretty good one. I don't think we have to go through them all to figure out what my wobble is.
So have you changed your communication strategy at all around that perceived, like, hey, I care about people's success more than probably even you do, right? That's part of your natural tendency, but the perception of that sometimes is getting missed, right? It's all about Ben. Have you changed your communication strategy as you've matured in this over the last number of years around ensuring that's more transparent, ensuring you're what your beliefs are forward in how you're communicating them, so there's not that miscommunication?
I've definitely been more intentional with the people that worked for me of telling them that. Like being before I wouldn't tell people like I'm telling you, I have your best interest in mind. If you don't think I do, tell me. And let's talk about it. Because if I do something that didn't, like, you need to tell me. I need to know. Because it's probably not what's happening, you know? And just like, I think Peter, at one point when we were a leadership team, Peter said, you said something like, I always assume that I'm doing things for good, for the right reason.
Yep.
Like, don't assume I'm not doing something for the right reason. And I think that was.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a big believer in assume the best in people until they prove you otherwise, right? It is a healthy way to live life. You know, sometimes it burns you, but it can cause you more good than harm in general. So yeah,
Right.
Assume the best.
Right. I mean, I've definitely been burned, but I mean, like, and I don't know why, but that for some reason that one always stuck with me, like that interaction. That was one that I had even years later. It was like I never really wanted to talk to that person again. Because it just was like, it was so, it's helped me because I was aware that I was actually probably the perception of what I was doing was definitely more there. But right after that, I remember going to people I was working with and that worked for me. And I was like, is this true? like, please tell me if I'm doing, and they were like, that's not true. I don't even know what that's, you know, so I definitely wasn't, I don't think I was doing that downward. I was doing that upward, which is interesting by itself. Probably why I didn't get promoted multiple times in my career.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think that behavior was driven by that fact itself.
What? Say more on that.
I think that if you felt passed over, then you feel like you need to tell people more about what you're doing and what your team's doing. And yet that's causing more of the problem.
Yep. That was definitely happening there. In that situation, it was, I was early on in that company and had built a number of those with other few other people. Like, we built a number of things that become standard today. And it was like getting passed over with other people is like, how is this possible? And so, yeah, I think it was definitely a reinforcing of like, well, I need to tell people like what's happening. And
right. Yeah.
So in that situation, that guy wanted me to come there. Kind of an internal move within the company. And I was like, well, only way I'm coming here is if I can get promoted, like at some point. It's kind of how I put it. Cause I was like, look, like this has happened multiple times. I don't want to move if it's not gonna. And that was me being honest, but it was I'm sure it came across as like the perception wasn't very good.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, I think, just to put a bow on that, Ben, I think as someone who has worked for you multiple times, I would say that I haven't experienced that negative empathy wobble on that downward communication. So I think your sense that it might be more of an upward facing or, outward facing piece is probably valid. I think you do a great job of ensuring people that work with you and for you feel that. I'm sure Tiffany would agree, or Tina would agree as well.
Oh, I think
she's like,
no, absolutely not. No, I think Ben and I had a little bit of a rough start, I would say when we first started working together. And I'm willing to take a lot of the pressure of that because I felt like it was a lack of empathy that put me in that position. I was never asked what I wanted. It was an authoritative move, which doesn't work for me or him. I think on both sides that was not, I think he was like, I was told I'm going to work with Ben and he was told you're going to work with Tina. And I think we didn't really have anything other than that sort of authoritative move to go on. But I honestly feel like the first 6 months was getting to know each other and building that trust. And once we had it, I felt that he did have my best interest in heart. I think we very much were aligned in what we wanted to do. There were a few things about him that I didn't understand that I had to learn because I thought, much like everything, I thought it was about me. I was like, why does this feel like he doesn't trust me? when it really turned out like it was really, it was at that point about him. It was about a need he had, specifically like video calls. Like if I had to work from home or be home with my kids, he'd be like, can we do a video call? And I was like, why do you need to see me? Like, I was like, I'm legitimately
the beach in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I was like, why? I'm not sitting by the pool. No, I wasn't.
I didn't care if you were.
And only later, when he had that call with Caroline, and she was like, this is a story you're telling yourself. When I heard that, I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a relief to me. Like, it wasn't about whether or not he trusted me. It was a need that he had for himself. And that's probably something we could have communicated to each other, and we didn't. So I think there was just like a lack of I don't know necessarily, I wouldn't call it authenticity, because I think that we have a very real relationship.
Probably too authentic.
Good or bad. And I know at this point it's probably gone off the deep end. But I think like it's one of those moments where like, had we taken the moment and said, and I had said, why does it have to be a video call? You know, and he was like, well, I pick up on all these cues and it's better for me. Like, then I wouldn't have kind of felt the way I did. So I think that was more a drop in communication. But I do think like, I think Ben and I share that lack of like, we don't accept your logic necessarily just because you have a title, or, you know, like there's a little bit of that I think that Ben and I share. And I think in reading the article, the thing that stuck out to me the most, and I realized specifically with the group of you, that I think the issue that I initially probably had was that I didn't trust myself. I really came into working there, came off of like a huge personal, emotional situation, and had come back into the workforce and was feeling very, I necessarily wasn't feeling the way I feel now, that I think I was like faking it until I could make it a little bit.
Unstable.
And so,
the uncaged Tina had not come out yet.
And then Tina got all, and then Tina got like
reference.
found herself. Then she found herself again. But I think it was a difficult transition. So I don't even know. It's hard to look back and think like, oh, the wobble that I had with Tiffany was this, because I don't know that I necessarily trusted myself enough to say, you know, to be as open as I could have been, and you know, as perhaps. I mean, I think I generally am me in all situations, because I think that was in the article too. Like, are you this person with your family and this person with your office? And I'm like, no, I'm pretty much only good at this one thing, so I'm gonna stick with it. It's true, but I do think the other pieces were rough for me initially, and I assume a lot of that responsibility on myself, that I was just not necessarily in a place to build trust, because I didn't have the internal trust that I needed.
And I think you touched on something interesting there as well, when you spoke about how that it took a little bit of time, right? And ultimately we're talking about trust. There's only so much you can build so fast, right? And some people can create trust very quickly, but ultimately that's a journey, right? It takes a while. Mm-hmm. And so being able to establish a quick foundation of trust is really helpful. And in consulting, you have to do that with countless people, countless times, and sometimes multiple groups of people in the same day, right? Your network is much wider. But as you then get within a company or within a team, you get more at-bats to do that. And that trust builds over time. It's not something that happens right away, right? So that's the other piece as well, is the difference between establishing rapport and basic trust with quick and initial introductions versus a long-term foundation of trust, either within a leadership team or within a larger, working team. So it takes time.
All right, who wants to go next? Let's do somebody else. Gotta get out the hot seat here. Peter, Tiffany, which one of you?
So I have a few situations. So I think my biggest wobble is authenticity. I think my second one is empathy, because I'm very logical. And I think you all are too. So, but I think my authenticity wobble kind of started when I started in consulting, and I was given feedback to be a certain way with clients versus internally. And so in meetings, and you guys probably noticed it, and I know, people at our company talked about it, was like, we were great in front of clients. And then when I'm not in front of clients, I'm more raw, and what I'm saying isn't as well thought out and clear, and it's just different, and it's more emotional when I'm not in front of clients. And so I think that's probably one of my issues. So I can think of one situation in October. I actually went to do a 90-minute meeting, which is just an introductory meeting with a new potential client. And I was explaining, EOS process, what we do to them. And the COO got up and left the room in the middle of this. I mean, it's an hour and a half. Like, you can't sit for an hour and a half. So
I'm done.
so again, so like my consultant hat is on because I'm selling, not my like real hat. And I realized this afterwards, and I'm working to fix it. But I handled that situation different than I would have with a client, but I shouldn't have. I should have just acted like, this is my client, and I'm going to give them an experience of what it's really like to work with me, right? That's the whole point of going there and meeting with them. And so, so I didn't say anything. I kept talking. And then the CEO, 2 seconds later, goes like this. He starts looking at his phone. And that's when I talked for like maybe 5 more seconds. And then I was like, okay, so I think we're just going to pause here, and we're going to wait for so-and-so to come back. So if you guys need a break, take it now. And they were like, no, we don't need a break. And I was like, no, you clearly do, because you're on your phone. Half the people are listening. One's not even in the room. So I didn't even take it any further.
Awesome.
But if it was a client, it would have been like, the second he got up, been like, are we taking a break right now? Like, what, is this boring?
To back up, just for everyone else's sake, is the rules are, if you're in one of these meetings with your leadership team, that if anybody leaves, you have to stop the meeting. Or if you can't have your phones out, like those have to be put it. Like, so that's just to give some people context as to what you're describing.
And what's hilarious is, as I was looking at the situation, I was looking at myself for my wobbles. I was also looking at their wobbles, because the guy was immediately on his phone. He's the CEO. The 2 other people, the only ones that are paying attention to me, aren't as high as they are, right? So they feel like, well, I don't know, am I supposed to stay on my phone, or like, what am I supposed to do right now, right? And so I could just see that all that was happening while I was there, and I was there to show them that I have the ability to help them become a more trusting team, and I didn't do it. And it was because of my authenticity, because I worried about what they would think of me, or about being too harsh with them, or something like that. So that was.
But you did do it eventually.
Not like I would have. And the one guy wasn't even there. He didn't even get the point. Like, he,
True.
he came back. I was like, oh, we took a break, but it wasn't like. I also should have said, like, does this happen in your meetings normally? Do people just leave? Do you keep talking? This isn't effective. But I totally missed the boat on it, and I wasn't being authentic. And of course, in my head, I was thinking, what is wrong with you people? Like, that's rude. But I didn't say it. So.
Not only is it rude, it's just completely disruptive. And then they asked you to be there, so you're like, don't you want to hear about it, or don't you want to hear about it?
Exactly. So the whole situation I learned from, but I left there and I was like, nope. I already knew they were talking to other people, and I knew they wouldn't handle a situation like that the same. So, it was interesting.
So they didn't become a client, is what you're saying.
Failed to try out.
Yep. And it all goes back to being worried about what people think of you. It's not about me. It's about the experience that you're going to have, right? And I'm helping you. And am I helping you or not? And I didn't help them in that meeting.
Yeah, it's interesting, the point you made around scenarios where you are more of a raw version of yourself, as you framed it, like internally, versus a more polished version, potentially externally or with clients. I would imagine that's pretty common, right? Again, especially in consulting and things like that. Do you think the call then, in terms of increasing authenticity, is to ratchet down the rawness internally, ratchet up the rawness with external? Like, what does authenticity mean then in those scenarios to ensure that you're building trust? Because there is some measure of self-monitoring that's appropriate, that's helpful to get things done. But how do you maintain authenticity within that?
But yeah. I have something to say, but I'll let Tiffany answer.
I think about that all the time, but I think what's really important is to constantly be like working on yourself and matching what you're doing to your true self. So not getting a job where you're always acting like something, because then you're not authentic, you're not going to be a great leader, and you're not going to be happy. And so, but back to Tina's point, like you have to know who that true self is and be willing to share it, because a lot of people are even afraid, and I'm even afraid to be as vocal about some of my points of view because of what people might think or whatever, right? Or what they might think about our family or anything like that. So I'm not as vocal as others. And that all comes down to just really knowing who you are and then being comfortable sharing it. And when you are, then you find the right experiences, but more importantly, I think the right opportunities and experiences find you. They come to you once you project who you are, and then you can be the same in the situations. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, no, this goes back to Tiffany. I've been talking about this for a while. This goes back to a lot of people get really, really bad clients because they think they just want a client. And most of the time, I think that has more to do with the fact that you probably weren't just the authentic you, because those would have self-selected out.
Right.
They wouldn't have chosen the Tiffany that's going to tell them to sit your ass back down, or we're just going to stop like that. The real Tiffany would have told them that right off the bat. And they would have, and some groups would love that and be like, hey man, we need someone to hold us accountable and challenge us. The groups that you don't, man, you don't want them anyways.
Exactly.
You don't want them as clients because they're going to suck. They're going to be the worst clients, and they're going to be people that don't really want to do it and don't want to change, or don't want your style, whatever style that is. I think I was just talking to another friend of mine who's like trying to find her voice, online and some social presence. And she's like, almost like copying I was like, stop copying other people. Do whatever comes natural to you. It could be video, it could be writing, it could be whatever thing is your voice. That's what you have to figure out. Not everyone can do what I'm trying to do. Like, you can't. I happen to be pretty good at like trying to talk to people. I use that.
So Peter, it's a great question, because I see a lot of it in you. And just like we said earlier, like you're doing a lot of different things. You're always doing different things. And you're doing that because you're good at it, right? You have a lot of skills. And I will be honest, I'm like, I talk to clients, I talk to people, I'm in networking, and they're like, oh, we're looking for someone to do this, and we're looking for someone to do that. And I always think like, I could do that because I can, right? Like I have those skills. I could jump in and do any of those things. The point is picking the right things that actually align with what you want to do and don't make you do or be something different. Mm-hmm. Because you can do it, right? It's important. And gosh, the more and more I'm out there, the more and more I'm learning that. And so, but first you just have to get clear on that.
Well, being on your own forces you to like figure that out. Because you got
Exactly.
no choice. If you have a job, it's like people could tell you that, but it's different. Like you're on your own. It is like you'll learn very fast, Tiff, right? You learn super fast those sort of situations.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Peter doesn't know how to say no, so that's a first problem. He just says yes to everything.
Why not? Who needs sleep?
I mean, you need me to do something? What do you need? Like climb Mount Everest? Yes.
He's going too, and he does a great job at it all. So.
Well, I know, but.
He's the teacher of all trades.
That's right. I love that, Tiff. That's great. I think I was sitting to think about yours last night, and I was like, because I don't think you have a lot of faults, but I was thinking if it was a wobble, it might be that one.
Yeah, I think my empathy wobble improved over my time working with you guys.
Oh.
And I think some of it was also perception from a situation that corrected itself.
So name nameless.
Yes. And so after that, I think that that it improved, but I do think that, and this was an article as well, and it's something I think that all of us here struggle with is we can be so logical and so quick to have the logical answers that we don't allow some time for others to catch up. And sometimes we even like internally judge them for it when we're not trying to. And that really makes it hard to show your empathy. So I think it's a triangle, because sometimes these things are at odds with each other, and you're trying to kind of, you know, bring them all into the middle and still be authentic. Like, I'm super irritated that you don't get this, and I've told you 5 times. And so that's authentic me, but how do I also seem empathetic, right? You're trying to navigate those 3 all the time.
Well, authentic doesn't mean you have to tell everybody everything what you're thinking.
Exactly.
I think that would be dangerous.
Exactly. So that's where the authentic thing is interesting. Authentic does not mean always saying what you're thinking.
No, I think they kind of clarify as misrepresenting some part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that Tiffany just touched on, which is I think really important, especially as individuals and teams can work together for long periods of time, is that ultimately like improvement in these areas is really hard to do on your own, right? There is some like self-work that needs to happen, but we don't see all of our blind spots. That's why they're blind spots. And so having close colleagues where you have that foundation of trust and that you're believing that the other person has your best interest in mind, where you can call them out on their stuff or give them advice. Ben mentioned an executive coach, right, who's used before in the past, who can be like a third-party objective observer. Those are essential tools to making us better in these things. There's one practice, Tiffany, through EOS that I'm sure you've used, that we use as a team before as well, called One Thing, where you can just say, the one thing I need you to do more of is this, or less of is this. And having the freedom to like say those things to each other and know that you've got like, they have your back now, like go do more of this, that's the best you, is hugely powerful. It increases that self-confidence so that you can get better at these things, or it calls out those things that maybe you weren't aware were those blind spots to begin with. So this is hard work to do by yourself. You got to have a team to do it with you.
Yeah, so that's interesting. One thing that I was thinking about is that while you may want to improve, it's really hard if other people are exhibiting that wobble and they aren't improving. So for example, I was thinking back to a situation in my past work history where a boss was just really, really I-oriented, very self-oriented. And I was becoming that way without like trying. And it was pointed out by my husband, who was like, you have become so selfish. Everything is not about you. And what I realized when I really thought about it was that it was external influences that were always around me that was like bringing that into my life. So it became harder and harder. It was almost like doing backwards work, right? And so it's also all about the people that you're surrounded with and who you're spending the most time with. And sometimes we don't have the ability to select those people if we're at work, you know? So that was one of the things I was thinking, you know, when you're talking about like working with the team and how we were so close in building the trust. And when you're doing that, if you have some people in that mix that aren't the right people, it can make it much harder.
Yeah, that's great.
So that was just one of my thoughts. But Peter, what about you? What about one of your wobbles? I can think of some.
Sure. I've got a list
Snap.
ready. You're about to hear about them. So there's one thing that jumped out to me before I get to mine, because I got to talk about other people's wobbles first. But I wonder if you guys resonate with this. So Tiffany, I think you and I, and really Ben as well, from one of the corners was logic, right? And it's whether people don't trust your ability to get things done, right? And I don't think that's the case with us. But I think what is true, that's when I probably feel strongest and most secure in, that it's not a wobble for me. But what I find when I reflected on this is that it's probably the one that I have the highest bar for other people that inhibits trust to them. So if I need something done and I don't trust you to do it, I'm going to be jumping in, right? Either to do it myself or to make sure it gets done the right way, right? So the bar of what good is high. And my ability to trust you as a downward reporting resource, as a colleague, as a leader is very strongly rooted in whether I believe you have the logic, the capability to get it done. So I wonder if there's also kind of an aspect of this where the piece we feel strongest in is also maybe the one that we care about the most in other people, in allowing us to trust them. So I don't know, just a thought. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but what's your reaction to that?
I agree with you. I'm very much the same way. Like I have a very short window of time for someone to show me that they can do something I already know I can do. Like I know I do it. I take on the responsibility of doing something when I could trust someone else to do it, but they haven't maybe met that very high bar that you're talking about.
I can see that.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is this is all about empowerment leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so it comes down to trust, but it's all about empowering others, right? And I do see that when we're unsure of people's capabilities and that rests in the logic, then we cannot empower.
Mm-hmm.
But when we're unsure of empathy, we're still empowering those people. And when we're unsure of authenticity, we're still empowering those people. I mean, I've seen it time and time again in businesses where the people that aren't necessarily a value fit and aren't showing that they care still get raised to very high levels in organizations because they can do the work and they do it well. So I think as maybe a culture in America, we put a lot of value in the logic piece of like, can you do it? Yeah. And the other soft skills are what ends up getting you fired, but you get promoted based on the logic.
Totally.
Very interesting. Yeah.
No, that's a good point.
Okay, well now I'll answer your actual question, which is what am I bad at? So many things. How much time do we have?
That's not even the question. That's not even the question.
No, so one thing definitely stood out as we was reading through that, and there was an element that I think sometimes can cross in authenticity, but more often for me comes out in that empathy wobble piece, which is I've been told, and this may or may not be true, I come across as calculating or cold sometimes, at least on first impressions. I'm pretty unemotional. Don't get rattled. Don't have highs and lows. Very much kind of maintain a steady path. And I think a lot of times, again, in perception, that it seems like I don't care, right? This happens in personal life. I can't count how many times in my marriage there's been like, my wife is the opposite end of the spectrum, very much hard on her sleeve,
Yes.
care,
Light.
hard on her sleeve, caring person. She's lovely. And I could feel just as strongly about something as she does, but the way we display that in our physical demeanors and how we express it is very different. So the calculating unemotional aspect of that is sometimes hard to show empathy, right? Where I might feel it, and I definitely recognize it, something that I can have empathy towards, but it often doesn't land, right? So that's probably the wobble that I see most often. There's one example that I think is relevant that came up recently. There was a manager who was reporting to me, and newly reporting to me, who was bringing some baggage in terms of the previous leader they were reporting to, not having his team's best interest in mind, right? Maybe putting people's jobs at risk, or we need to swap out this person for this person, trying to make some moves, right? And so that manager cared a great deal about their team and wanted to protect those people, believe they could do the job. And me coming in, wanted to make sure that I also had empathy towards those team members' situations, that I also cared about their success. I wanted them to develop and grow. And it took me time to prove that I had empathy towards that situation, towards what that manager cared about, and towards those team members as well. Because I could have said it, and probably did in the first week or two, hey, I'm not looking to get rid of anyone, right? Right away. We need to make sure we're building the team up. But that person didn't believe it until I was able to prove it through actions over time, with the way that I approached the team, communicated with him, and ultimately the results. Because perhaps the empathy wobble wasn't as outward to him. It took him a while for him to believe that was the case.
I don't think that's empathy. I think what you're describing is authenticity. The way they describe it is you're misrepresenting some part of yourself.
Yeah, I get that.
I don't think it's empathy. I don't think your issue is empathy. I think you understand what people are going through, and I don't think you put your own interests first. I don't think people pick up on that. I think what they're picking up on is they don't know how to read.
Yeah.
And so so I always remember I was joking just like a robot a little bit. And so that was our joke, just Peter and I, nothing personal. But it was like, because he was like one of your greatest strengths is that you don't get rattled. But the hard part about that is it will seem like you're not being real. A perception is that you're not being real with people because you don't show any emotion, or he doesn't care. He doesn't even say anything. I'm sure Amy has said that to you. Your wife has said that to you. Well, you don't seem to even care.
Exactly.
And
I think that, oops, sorry.
What are you talking about?
I think that ties pretty nicely, Ben, into what we talked about in the brand piece, that it's one thing to talk the talk, but it's another thing to walk the walk, right? Like action, people are what they do, not what they say. And so I think, it's more show than tell.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the point I was trying to make with the example, was that since the outward display of authenticity maybe didn't land or wasn't felt, even though I felt like I was being very authentic, just didn't show it in the way that landed well. It took those actions over time to prove that, like, no, actually what I say I mean, what I mean I care about just as much as you do, and it's worth believing and trusting in, right? So that's a good point. That actually might land more towards authenticity. I don't think that I struggle being authentic in myself, but I think in terms of people being able to trust that is my authentic self, is perhaps what you're referring to.
No, it's all perception. Just like mine is like, I really care about people and making them better. But the perception is I don't, right? That's just, and I had to work on that piece, whereas you could probably work on, crying a little bit once in a while.
Yeah, just get me talking about my kids. That's the one thing that'll do it.
Just shed a tear.
That's right. Yeah, it's funny, but I think it's very true. We joke about it, that it's true. And I think Brene Brown, in the work that she's doing around increasing the conversation around vulnerability and the importance that has in getting things done, in teamwork, in growing individually and within business and team units, is huge, right? And I think that speaks to authenticity, is the willingness to be vulnerable and, putting yourself out there personally, talking about your fears and challenges, things you're not good at, asking for help for things. For high performing individuals like us, it's hard to put that forward. It's not natural. And in consulting, the fake it till you make it, right? Tina referenced that before. Is the opposite of authenticity and vulnerability, where it's like, hey, no, I'm the expert, or we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
That's the front you put on. And so breaking that mold is challenging. It's a lot of reconditioning, for sure.
It's tough when you come out of that, and like Tiffany grew up in it. Like Tiffany started your whole career in that world where it's like, no, you're going to be like this, and don't say those things, and don't be this, and don't be that. That's not easy to break out of.
Yeah. So like, this is your behavior in these meetings, and this is your behavior in these meetings, and this is okay to ask here, and this is not okay to ask here. I mean, I got held back from meetings. Oh, Tiffany, can you hold back for a minute? And told, like, you can't say that in these meetings. When am I supposed to say it? So I learned very well. One thing I do is take feedback very well and apply it. So it's been really hard to reverse it. I mean, I was promoted for having it,
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. No, this has been great, guys. I think that's probably a wrap. I think we're running out of time. Otherwise, Tina, we go more into what yours is, but I think we're past the due. This has been awesome. Thanks so much for doing this. I think hopefully for people, it's been really helpful on just talking about trust, and people read the article. It'll be kind of like a combo for people and adding value in that realm. So thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
Great talking to you.
We go chasing after answers. No more each day.